One of the most misunderstood or controversial or feared or approach with caution products are pigments. And that's unfortunate because in my opinion, pigments are the most powerful earth effect tool that we have in our toolbox. Nothing else goes from a dusty, dry surface all the way up to full blown, as muddy as you want to go as pigments. And they're a powerful conversation in terms of approaching the game plan for weathering. You know, how are you going to do this? What are you going to do? What's your scenario, theater, vehicle, where it's at, all the variables involved with earth and getting that onto a ground combat vehicle and how you're going to do that. I left the enamel conversation, a decade ago. Pigments far outstrip their capabilities. And in the hands of the pros, yeah, enamels can do great stuff. But the truth of the matter is, enamels don't replicate dust this way. They can't. They don't have that ability. Pigments are a safe, non-toxic product for us. And they provide everything from almost, 1% dust up to 100% crazy mud. So that, if you know how to use them, is a hyper powerful tool that a lot of you are probably either just not paying close enough attention to, and or you just don't understand how they really actually work. First order of business is you kind of want to get the model in a position to work for you. And that means the model on its side, the surfaces you want to work on are facing upwards. Why? Because you want gravity to hold them in place for you while you do this. And yes, you can pre-mix pigments and do other stuff with it, but the general ballpark range of effects that you can get out of this result from a dry application and then a fixer. And that's what you see me doing 90% of the time in all the work that I do. I put a dry application of pigments down and then I apply a fixer in some way, shape, or form. For dust applications, I use the airbrush and I mist that fixture down onto that surface. That maintains its dry, dusty look. I can layer that up, a dozen times if I wanted to for whatever strength opacity in the dust that I'm after. And that's perfect for a ton of summer, springtime, depends on the scenario, deserts, et cetera, type of special effects. And in the moment I want to go heavier, thicker, dried mud, then I switch to an actual liquid fixer that you see me doing here, using an eyedropper or paintbrush and getting that liquid down into the pigments themselves. The trick to this is you just want to be careful. You don't want to flood the surface. Get a drop flowing out of there and touch that drop to the surface and let it pull itself out and soak into the pigments. That's what you see me doing. Carefully get that drop out, touch it to the pigments, and let that capillary action soak that in like a sponge. Now this is all done during the live stream, so I'm discussing that as I go. And this is just a demonstration of that purpose. When you do this and you're going through the motions of, hey, I want more, that's not enough, or this is, again, everything that we do in weathering, guys, everything that we do, you should be treating it with layers. You should never try to do anything in one go or make that attempt. You're going to either back yourself in the corner, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to screw it up, and the end result's not going to look as good as it could have been. If you're doing things in one step, doesn't matter what it is, if it's a wash or pigments or whatever the heck's going on, you leave a ton of stuff on the table. And that's to your own demise. If you're a contest or publisher, whatever it is, social media, superstar, if you're doing stuff in one step, you're leaving things on the table. Layers, layers, layers. This is how you weather up stuff. Why? Because you're weathering time. None of this happens in a day in the real world anyway. So you need to get in that motion of, okay, I need to think about what this looks like a week, a month, a year, etc. So let's switch to the Stug and let's do it for real this time. The Hetzer was kind of just a walkthrough. And the Stug has been painted and chipped and it's going through the motions here. And I'm discussing, okay, I've got a winter product. This is what I'm doing. How do I get my pigments to work for me? So the first thing is you need to create batches. Or I recommend that you create batches. Take 4 or 5 of your lightest colors, throw them in a canister, split that up in half, pour darker colors into medium, 3-4 new colors, make a darker medium batch, and then take some of that medium batch and pour it into a third container, add a little bit more of your darkest tones, including black if you need it, and that gets your darker batch of mud pigments. Now that scenario right there will cover any ground combat vehicle you can think of. And if you need to tune the color between a yellow or a gray or a red, that's easy to do. Just add in some of those colors and mix it back in, which is why those canisters are so easy to deal with. However, everything starts with a matte surface. So let's get that clear out of the gate. No varnishes, no satins, no glosses. Don't even try. Don't even bring it up, please. You just can make life hard for yourself. You need tooth. You need surface bite for this to work properly. So a matte surface, Everything facing upwards, horizontal, let gravity hold the dry pigments in place. And then from there, because this is a messy product, you can see me, I'm just carefully adding it to the side of the hull. I don't care about the road wheels at this point in time. With small road wheel vehicles such as the Stugs and Panzer 3s and 4s, etc., this is an easy thing to do in one collective go. If you have a T-34, King Tiger, etc., with big road wheels that cover the visible portion of the hull, you're gonna have to do this separately with the road wheels off. But because of this case here, it's easy to do all at once. But just start with the side of the hull. Get your colors down. Light to dark. This is you guys should know this by now. Light to dark for your weathering conversations. So the light batches go down. This should start to percolate out, even in my semi-blurry live stream video here, that you can see the variations in color already in the light batches happening. That's the key to success with this. That's the key to realism. If you're using one pigment color, it's going to look like a toy at the end of the day. So if you're after true success with pigments, embrace the fact that you need to use these in layered colors grouped into batches and then put them down on light to dark. So I get the light to cover the bulk of the hull, and then I'll switch in and start putting down some medium. And as you add the darker tones, the reason for the darker tones is moisture. What you're trying to replicate here is a dried mud scenario, and around kind of the suspension components or via gravity, when the tank's driven normally, moisture goes down to the lower edges around the suspension components. It doesn't dry as fast because the exposed parts of the mud to the side of the hull will dry faster than those hidden in shadows, etc. Stuff like this. That's what the darker colors start to represent. So that's how you apply the darker colors. You apply them around those components to showcase or illustrate captured moisture that hasn't dried quite effectively. So that kind of scenario gives you a snapshot on the vehicle. And this is still kind of a general conversation. I tune everything to the project when I get into, serious model work, but for demonstration purposes, teaching purposes, this is kind of where you should be right now. So again, this is a thicker mud application. We're going with the pure liquid fixer. And in the fixer conversation, the only real thing I get concerned about or give any thought to is whatever brand of paint I'm using to paint the model. This was a Mission model, so it's got Mission Models paint thinner. That's all I do with the fixers. I just kind of go one-to-one. I stay within kind of the ecosystem that I'm using. And the reason for that is the fixer, as the paint thinner, will bind those pigments to the lower levels of paint underneath. That's a pretty simple process. If you're applying substantially more pigments than what you see on screen right here, then yeah, you can use a regular pigment fixer from the companies themselves, and that's fine too. Just understand that those have varnishes in them as kind of a binding agent. And so you can have some weird drying scenarios, and they can be a little funky to work with. I prefer the paint thinners myself. As you can see here, once it's dry, that texture is pretty solid. I mean, you'd have to really go at it, directly with some sort of contact to knock it off. So that'll hold up fine. And then from there, with the whole layer basically kind of set right now, I'm demonstrating how to move on to the wheels. The beauty of pigments is, you treat the armor as kind of a single unit. That thing would be driving through whatever it was driving through, so all the components are going to be gaining this. So if you get a little bit of, on the next layers, if you get some overages or overspray, if you will, to use that term in this, it doesn't matter because it kind of just blends in with the other pigments. So that's the easy part of this. It's not as stressful as a lot of guys make it out to be. And if you think it's messy, then if you see here, I've got paper towels underneath. You just work small and keep all your, keep what you're applying in controlled processes so it doesn't get everywhere. Don't breathe heavy, don't sneeze around them or anything like that until they're set up. But other than that, I mean, yeah, they're going to get some places. They're going to get a little bit of a mess with doing pigments. And I tend to plan my armor pigment sessions out a little bit. I try to do the tracks around the same point in time because they're going to get a lot of the same processes as I do here. And this is kind of when I get the lower part of the armor project sort of wrapped up and completed. I don't really have a black or white hard rule on when to do pigments in a project. Oftentimes it's kind of the feeling and how the model's going along in and of itself. Pigments tend to come in towards the end of a project because they're delicate. Just in their nature, they're a dust product on the surface. And so if you get a fingerprint or a tool in there, you damage it somehow or whatever happens, you will damage the pigments in and of themselves. So to do them towards the end is going to be the safer play on that, which is why I tend to do them after I've got the upper areas kind of done, at least in the hull conversation. You can still do the turret if it's a tank later on. That process is okay, but in case of a Stug or, you know, as a lower hull of a tank, I tend to do that in the second half after the top part is kind of pretty much handled, if you will. And that's the really only conversation I'd have about when to do pigments. Because I do everything really controlled, as you can see here, none of the other surfaces really get messed up too much. And that's kind of the function of the precision that happens from how I apply them. That's why everything's on the side. That's why, you know, apply it real precisely. And then come in and start adding the additional weathering and stains into the pigments. And again, the liquid OPR process, this kind of overly thinned oil paint that replicates all the stains and leaky wheel hubs, suspension components, anything that would move on a chassis is going to get a lubricant of some form, or will have some sort of hydraulic, you know, lubricant inside of it, or oil or whatever, that can eventually, you know, blown seals on wheel hubs, etc., etc., etc. These are all the things that you can do with that into the pigments. So that creates a really nice kind of layered conversation about, you know, a dry pigment, add a fixer, get your texture, dried mud, and then get your leaks and your grease and stains. And then you just repeat this process until you're happy and satisfied. I'd say this is about halfway done on this particular Stug. And that's really kind of how it is. And from here, you just layer stuff up. You know, whatever the look is that you're going after. Here's an earlier Stug from Tank Art 4. You know, again, another Stug B in the winter, one of my favorites. And it's all because pigments really provide that level of final touch that really recreates weathering to a high degree of realism. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you for your time and support. We'll see you on the next one.